If you are able, please consider donating to the victims of the Uvalde Rob's Elementary School Massacre. Thank you. Hey, it's Ukallii. Today we are going to talk about Chapter 9 of the Harry Potter Rewrite fanfiction. So this scene starts off with Harry waking up, as he has been doing this whole time he's been in Diagon Alley, in this random room on the floor. And the room that he wakes up this time is a room he's never seen before. It's a storeroom. He thinks it's an attic, but it doesn't really make sense for it to be an attic because of the layout of the apartment. So he looks around, he's trying to find a door, and he trips over a box and he finds nursery toys. And that's when he realizes this is what's left of Godric's Hollow. This is his parents' stuff. This is his stuff from when he was a child. And he just breaks down completely. He just breaks down into tears. And he doesn't know how to process it. He doesn't know what to do. He's just completely overwhelmed by emotions that he doesn't know how to deal with. Something that I think the books absolutely never did, that really bothered me, was they never really dealt with Harry mourning his parents. The only time that Harry really even mourns his parents, there's two moments. One is the Mirror of Erised moment, and one is in the seventh book when Harry goes to Godric's Hollow, and it's just a very short scene because it gets interrupted by the plot. Harry's an orphan. He is entering a world of his parents without ever really remembering his parents. It is really important that Harry be given time to process the loss of his parents. And he's a kid. He's 13 years old. He needs to process that loss. So I want to have scenes scattered throughout the fanfiction in every one of the books where Harry has to deal with that loss. Not just with being the heir of the Potter estate, not just with that kind of stuff, but actually with the loss itself, and dealing with the mourning of his parents. So he's just not ready to deal with it yet. He won't be ready to deal with it for a while. Remus and Rhodes are going to try to get him to deal with it every time that they can, but he's not there yet. He's just not ready. So he kind of rejects this confrontation, but he does take a few keepsakes. He won't let go of the rabbit, the stuffed rabbit that he found that was his when he was a baby. He just won't let go of it. He takes it with him everywhere while he's in the apartment. He doesn't take it with him in Diagon Alley because he's aware of how that would look, but he does keep it with him at all times in the apartment. He also takes his father's Triskelion bracelet. Remember, the Triskelion is a symbol of the Potter family. He takes his mother's thin wristwatch. Wristwatches in history were typically worn by women, because men wore pocket watches because they were more expensive and they were more show of wealth. Women wore wristwatches because it was more practical. And then eventually men caught on to the wristwatch trend and started wearing them as well. So he has his mother's wristwatch. And then his father's signet rings. Signet rings are rings that have your family crest on them and you use them to seal letters. So it's a kind of traditional way of doing that. Signet rings were really popular all the way up to the early 20th century. So all the way up to about the 30s, they were really popular. So James would have had one. Harry is now taking that signet ring, but it's too big for him, so it only fits on his thumb. After that, the Malfoys return for the second weekend of school shopping. They did close last week, and now they're coming to do the kind of more standard school shopping, and Draco has convinced his parents to just let him shop with Harry, and of course Remus is just like, of course you did. Harry's not comfortable enough with Draco to tell him about what happened with finding his parents' things, so he just doesn't say anything about it. And that's just to show that even though he's relatively comfortable with Draco, and even though he does consider Draco a friend, they're not quite there yet. And there are things about Harry that Draco does not know. Draco doesn't know about the Dursleys. Draco doesn't know about his past in Ireland. Draco doesn't know about any of those. So that's going to be a point of contexture in their relationship. But right now, Draco doesn't know about any of that stuff. He just assumes that Harry was pampered, and he just assumes that, Harry's had a good life. He just doesn't even consider the possibility that Harry's been through hell, quite frankly. They head out, they go to the elevator to go downstairs to go school shopping, and there's a scene that I moved. So in the original version, this scene was in the bookshop. Draco meets them in the bookshop, and he starts flirting with Harry, and Harry's like, don't flirt with me, I don't want other people to think that we're a couple, or anything like that. Here I've actually moved that scene to the privacy of the elevator. So Draco is doing this in the elevator, in the lift, before anyone can see them, so that he can have kind of just a moment with Harry alone, of having Harry alone to flirt with him. This is to signify that Draco is not just interested in Harry as a public figure. Draco just does not only see Harry as a publicity stunt. He really is interested in Harry. And this becomes kind of a bigger deal as the fanfiction goes on. I actually wrote an entire chapter from Draco's perspective to really showcase his feelings about Harry, but this is the first kind of clue that Harry gets that Draco might actually be romantically really interested in him. And it's not just him messing around. He does flirt with everyone, but it's not just him messing around. He might actually be interested in Harry, and this is the first kind of glimpse that Harry gets into that. They head out to Diagon Alley. They're reporters. It scares Harry. He's like, what the hell is this? And they go to Madame Malkins. Now, in the original book, this is when Harry and Draco meet at Madame Malkins. They just got out of Gringotts. They head straight to Madame Malkins. Hagrid is motion sick, so he goes to have a drink at the pub and leaves Harry and Madame Malkins alone, so he meets Draco. I wanted to have a scene in Madame Malkins. It didn't end up happening. I just couldn't come up with a scene, but Draco and Harry go to Madame Malkins, and I do add this description of what the first year uniforms look like. This is just the first year uniforms. The house uniforms are a bit different. You see the first year's uniforms at least. The colors for the first year for Prime House are purple and white. Next, they head to the hat shop, and Draco explains the difference between conical hats and descended hats. These are two historical hats. There was a time in history during the Middle Ages whenever people would wear conical hats, which are pointed like cones, and descended hats, which are hats that have like a little tail at the back. This was actually a medieval trend. I decided to include it because I think it makes sense for magical drawing. This is a theory in Wicca that you can draw energy and draw magic from nature around you. And I figured that that would be a really cool thing to include with these hats. I would like to actually have like a scene about this happening later on in the series. I haven't written it yet, I don't know. But basically the theory is that conical hats draw magic and energy from the atmosphere, and descended hats draw magic and energy from the earth. So it made sense to me passive magic, which is more in line with like healing and stuff, would be what's drawn from the earth, and the atmospheric magic would be the active magic. So the conical hats draw active magic, and the descended hats draw passive magic. Then they head to the bookshop. Rose is a little surprised that Harry's a bookworm, that he likes to read. This is because Rose's interactions with Harry at the Dursley house were always on her time. They weren't on his time, so she doesn't actually know what he does in his free time. She doesn't actually know what his hobbies are. So here we're just seeing that Harry does like to read. He tries to get this book, and we start to see his anxiety about Hogwarts. This becomes more and more of a point of a matter for him, something he's really scared about. He's worried that he's going to be behind everyone else. He's really worried that everyone else at school is going to be so far ahead of him, and he's never going to be able to catch up. This is actually canonical. So in the first book, on the Hogwarts Express, Harry actually gives this kind of narrative, this kind of narration that he's really worried that everyone at Hogwarts is going to be ahead of him, but it only happens in one scene. And I think that that's a failure. I think this needs to be something that's ongoing. So I have it ongoing all the way through the first term at Hogwarts. Harry's really worried that he's behind his classmates and he doesn't know as much as them. So he studies really, really hard. And then he realizes that actually he's not behind, and he's actually kind of ahead of his classmates, and he relaxes, he calms down. But that doesn't happen for a little while. So right now we're beginning to see this subplot of Harry being obsessively studious because he's really scared that he's going to be behind his classmates. Then they head to Scribulus's, which is the stationery shop. I wanted to include this it's just a paragraph, but I really wanted to include it because I wanted to point out, like, one of the big differences that I'm making in this fanfiction is to modernize the wizarding world. I think it's really weird that wizards use parchment and quills. Parchment, if you guys don't know how parchment is made, I learned this in my English degree. Parchment is made from baby cow skin. It's kind of animal cruelty. I'm not really a fan of it, and I'm not going to have parchment in this story. Paper is much easier to produce. It's a lot cheaper to make. So, and it was publicly available during the 19th and 20th century, and 21st century, obviously. Paper is made from trees. It's also made from bark. You can make homemade paper. You can make recycled paper. Paper's really easy to make. I can make paper in my backyard. It's real easy. It's not complicated. It doesn't require a lot of complicated ingredients. I think it makes perfect sense for there to be like a paper maker in Hogsmeade and them to just churn out paper for the students to use. Like, I don't understand why paper isn't used at Hogwarts. It doesn't make any sense. There's no magical or explanation or anything for why paper is not used. One reason that I can think of is that parchment is waterproof, paper is not. But like, can't you just have a spell for that? So they're using paper, they're using notebooks. Notebooks were a thing in the Victorian period. So they're using notebooks. Harry buys vertical line notebooks, which is what we're used to, and also horizontal line notebooks for Augram and Chinese, so he can learn Chinese. Because Chinese and Augram are both written vertically. They're written up and down, so he bought them for that. He also buys calligraphy brushes for Chinese, quills, pens, and pencils. I saw someone write about how they thought that students at Hogwarts didn't use pens at Hogwarts because pens can be enchanted to do things like, you know, spit ink at you and things like that. Makes sense. It does. It really does. But during the 19th century, there were a lot of different kinds of pens. And one of the most common kinds of pens was the dip pen. So it's a kind of pen that the ink is not held in the pen itself. You actually have to dip it into the ink. And the tip of the pen absorbs more ink than a quill does. So we can write for longer, and you have much more control of the tip. And pencils, I can't imagine why they weren't using pencils at Hogwarts. That makes no sense. Of course they'd be using pencils. Pencils were invented in the 14th century, guys. While they're checking out, Draco sees that Harry's got one of the Potter library books called Children's Chafes, A Guide to Common Ointments and Powders by Charles Potter. This is a book about dry potions. Dry potions are a real thing in medicine. They were typically used by lots of cultures. The Chinese had dry potions. The point of a dry potion is that it can be mixed into just about anything. You can mix dry potions in with tea, with food, and it's a lot easier. They're not as powerful because they don't have as many active ingredients, so they don't have bad reactions to whatever you're mixing it in with, but they're more effective on the long term, and you usually use them with kids. So including this element here is just to kind of foreshadow opening up potions from just being liquid potions, which is what we see almost exclusively through the Harry Potter series, to also including some other forms of medicinal roots like pills, dry potions, aromatics, other such uses of potion making in other ways that I'd like to include in the series. Continuing on, we next go to Ollivanders, and when they're at Ollivanders, you see this difference that I've included in the fanfiction from the original canon. In the original story, there's just wands. Everyone uses wands from the age of 11 all the way through adulthood, right? This is something I wanted to change about the fanfiction, because there is an extremely rich mythology and history to magical implements that are all over the world, and I really wanted to incorporate that history and not just ignore it for this story. I didn't just want everyone to just use wands all the time. There's already a history in Harry Potter of wandless magic users. I wanted to have other kind of implements. So what do I mean by implement? When you look into why a mage in any kind of fantasy setting would use a wand, basically what the wand is it's like a mouse cursor. It's a focal point. It's like a laser focus. And it just allows the magic to have a place to go. You're telling it where to go. All magical devices in all fantasy mediums are just ways to tell the raw magic where to go. It's like putting in code to a computer that tells your computer what to do. So basically, when you cast a spell, you're telling your magic what you want, and that's why spells say exactly what you want the effect to be. They, Wingardium Leviosa, float like a feather, The spells literally mean what you want them to mean. And there's all kinds of traditions and all kinds of histories of spells being presented in different ways and magical mediums being presented in different ways, but they all have the same purpose. I wanted to include all of it because I'm spoiled for choice. So what I did was I had it so that at Hogwarts, students start off with staves. Staves, also known as quarterstaves, are, they're large wands, basically. And then that is to give their magic the biggest possible target that it could have to cast any kind of spell. And then from there, they graduate up to staves. Staves are like half the height of a wand. They're like a rod, in Card Captors, she has a rod that she uses. It's just a scepter. And then from there, they'll graduate to wands, which we've already seen in the Harry Potter series, and and then from there, if they're really good, hopefully they'll graduate to wandless magic, which we've already seen Remus do throughout the story. So the idea at Hogwarts is to educate them with less and less of a focus, so that their magic is being focused in their mind instead of being focused with their words, and with their implement. As such, they learn all kinds of other implements too. I've incorporated that the second year is this kind of free-for-all where they learn all kinds of different things. They learn cards and runes and a bit of ritual magic, which they'll continue to learn if they stay at Hogwarts. And it's just to show them there are all different ways that your magic can be focused, but you've got to have something to focus it, and the medium that you use to focus your magic is specific to what you want it to do. I like the idea of it being basically like the more basic the spell is, the more simple and common the spell is, the more likely it has a pre-made charm or something that you can buy that just does it for you, like a color change quill that you literally just tap the thing that you're kind of trying to change the color of, and it does it for you. And I like the idea of that being introduced young to early mages, because they don't have the knowledge to do that stuff themselves. They don't have the knowledge to do that with a spell, so they kind of need the implement to do it for them until they reach the point they can do it themselves, and then they'll do it. So like by the time these kids are graduating Hogwarts, they don't really need the cards, they don't need the runes, they don't need their staff, they don't need these things, they can just do it themselves. And that's the whole point. They're training tools. I also included in this scene the family wands being brought to Ollivanders so he can examine them. The idea behind this is that because magic is generational, because it does build over generations, and because this is why purebloods are so proud of their history, because they've been building up magic over generations and generations, it makes sense that magic would kind of pool, if you will, in their magical implements, so they'd pass this down through the generations. In the canonical book, Ron has his grandfather's wand or something like that. This is where I got this idea from. That families will pass on wands down through the generations. Like Neville has his father's wand. That each magical family would pass on these implements down the generations, and they would gather power by doing that. I kind of added off in this idea that transference can happen off of these objects. If you spend enough time with them, you kind of absorb some of that power, which is how squibs gain enough power to become mages. There's also a theory that this is how Muggleborns are created, by being around magical implements for a really long time, etc. I've built this into the metaphysics of the world, so this is not just something that shows up with wands. This is something that shows up in multiple places in this fanfiction, because I wanted to build it into the metaphysics. I want to help answer that question of where does magic come from, and part of it is it's being passed down generation after generation, from one generation to the next. So Ollivander looks through Harry's family's wands, and he notices that Harry's magic is weird. Something weird's going on, and he very clearly points out to Remus, like, if I were to give him a wand right now, I give him some kind of implement right now, he'd be at the wand already. Like, we wouldn't need a staff already, we need a wand already, because his magic is so strong right now, and that is a red flag to Remus that something very bad is going on with Harry. Something very, very wrong is happening, because his magic was not like that the last time that Remus saw him. Remus also hints that the Ghost Festival is coming up. Ollivander is going to come to town for the Ghost Festival. Again, I mentioned this before. This was a miscalculation of mine. In the original version of the fanfiction, he said Mid-Autumn Festival. It's not the Mid-Autumn Festival, it's the Ghost Festival. We'll be seeing the Ghost Festival later. So after that, they have lunch. They head back to the apartment to have lunch. Draco finally gets his hands on the Potter books to flip through them, and Harry really sees how passionate he is about healing, and this becomes really important to their relationship going forward and in later books. The fact that Draco has an earnest and true-hearted interest in healing. He really does care about it, and that becomes the thing that kind of keeps the two of them linked on a low level, like even when they're at each other's throats. Like, that is something that they have in common, this healing interest between the two of them, and that's what gives Harry hope that they can be friends. And eventually it's something that I've integrated into Draco's redemption arc going forward with the fanfiction. The fact that he has an earnest and true interest in healing. This is the thing he wants to do with this. After that, they head to the Wind Potion shop, and this scene happens. I feel like this scene's really self-explanatory, but I do want to point out that the shielding thing that happens at the beginning of this scene, where the explosion happens and everything kind of gets thrown across the room and Harry is left untouched. This is to hint at what probably happened the night of Godric's Hollow. This is to be a hint to everyone who sees this scene in the world, right? Anyone who sees this, who sees Harry completely uninjured and like basically in the middle of an explosion and unharmed, it is a hint that this is probably what happened when Voldemort attacked at Godric's Hollow. It's basically a shield. This is going to come up a lot in the series. This thing that when Harry's magic is at its peak, it shields him from harm. I really want to dive into the possibility of this influencing certain scenes that happen later in the story, but something to keep in mind is that this only really happens when Harry's magic is at its peak. So it's not like this is going to save him from the graveyard, and it's not like this is going to save him from the battle of the Department of Mysteries, but it is just something to keep in mind for other scenes. When Harry is at his strongest and he's at his peak, he is not to be messed with. And this is kind of why I'm planning for certain scenes to work differently later in the story. So this is kind of a foreshadowing, but kind of not, that Harry's magic does the shielding thing. And this is because of James and Lily giving their magic to Harry. It's because of the transference. This shield that happens is primarily from their magic, protecting him, forming a protective bubble around him. After that, we get this moment of Harry showing his intelligence. Now, I really don't like the idea of Harry being so dense and stupid that he's useless. I think in the books there are certain times when Harry is just so dense he's kind of useless as a character. I don't like that. I like to have an intelligent lead character. I don't want him to be as smart as Hermione. I don't want him to be a genius. But I want to show off that he does have a Slytherin mind. He does have a sense of Slytherin inside of him. He can tell what's going on. He is a strategist in a way. Not a chess strategist like Ron, but he can tell what the point is of enemy actions. He can diagnose what the goal is of enemy actions. And that's what he's doing here. He's analyzing Rosier's actions and explaining the point of it. It kind of to stall for time because he's waiting for the orders to show up. He reveals this in a way by saying we've been talking for like 5 minutes and the orders still aren't here. So he kind of reveals that he's been stalling for time. So Rosier is trying to goad him into using his magic. He realizes that's a clue. Rosier wants him to use his magic. It must be connected to what Ollivanders says, and he realizes from that he's poisoned. And he's probably got something that's causing him to drain out his magic so that he's weak and easily used. He's stalled long enough for Remus to recover. Remus goes out, he kicks some ass. That scene is awesome. I love it exactly the way it is. And in the end, Remus kind of gets the last laugh because he uses silver nitrate from the reporters' cameras against the Death Eaters to capture them. But then Harry kind of collapses a little bit. He doesn't faint. He just he trips. And it's to signify that like he just used a lot of magic. This is cost of magic. This is one of the things I didn't like about the Harry Potter books. They don't really talk about the cost of magic. Here, I want to show it. So Harry's been hemorrhaging magic. He just used a ton of magic to protect himself. He is really low now, and he's in danger at this point. So he doesn't faint, but he collapses a little bit, and Severus Snape shows up. Now, I really want to talk about Snape here because my Snape is very different from the canonical Snape. In the books, Snape is this bitter toad who is just so obsessed with himself and so self-centered that he doesn't really care about anyone else. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who try to defend Snape and all of this other stuff. They're like, he was loyal to Dumbledore to the end. Like, no, he wasn't. And the truth is, if Voldemort had chosen Neville, Snape would be the most loyal Death Eater ever. J.K. Rowling herself has admitted that, and I talked about that in the planning videos. Snape really needs an overhaul in this series, and that's what I'm starting to do here in this scene. The first thing is his appearance. In the books, like, it's demonstrated in his youth that his appearance is a major element of self-consciousness for him. He's really self-conscious about the way he looks. He really hates it when people talk about him. That was one of the main things that people used to tease him about when he was a teenager. And then he becomes a potion master and does nothing to change his appearance. I think that's weird. Like, there are canonically beauty potions and things like that to make you look better. And yet he doesn't even try. He doesn't even attempt to change his appearance. I think that's weird. I don't think that fits. I think it makes perfect sense that if you have the power to change something about yourself that you're super self-conscious about, you should do it. You know, and if you can do it without repercussions, then do it. So I think Snape would have used beauty potions to change his appearance, so that, you know, he can not be quite so self-conscious about it as an adult. And I think that it's really important to demonstrate that Snape is a really good potion master. There are a few times in the books where people talk about Snape's skills. But as far as demonstrating his skills, we don't really see any scenes where Snape really shows his prowess as a potion master. He makes the Wolfsbane potion for Remus, and Remus talks about how very few people can make this potion, and Snape does it without screwing it up every month. But that's it. That's kind of the only moment that we really get Snape's abilities. I don't like that. I think it's really important to demonstrate that if you say that a character is a genius, you really have to show them being a genius. I think it's important to show, not tell. And so I don't think that people should just talk about how Snape is so great all the time and then never show it. So I want to have scenes where he actually demonstrates his knowledge. This is one of them. He just takes one look at Harry. He just does a quick analysis of Harry, and he can already tell what's going on with him. He's like, you have Hulajing poison. Bam. You know, instantly. He doesn't even know anything else about the circumstances, and he just already knows. He can just tell. There's also a little change that I made from the original version of this scene, where in the original version, Harry speaks Gaelic to him, and he says, yes, I'm Irish, but I don't speak Gaelic. That doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. So I fixed that. He does speak Gaelic in this version. I did correct that. And he also has this, you know, this reaction to Rose because she looks so much like Lily. He's kind of affectionate towards her a little bit. And then they have that huge argument, and that affection kind of goes out the window. But he is kind of a little bit affected by Rose because she looks just like Lily. And he does still have that kind of lingering affection for Lily. But I want to be really clear, Snape is not in love with Lily in this version. He had a crush on her as a teenager. He regretted the break of their friendship, but that's the extent that I'm gonna go with it. I really want Snape to move on romantically, to have had other relationships, to have other relationships. You'll see that more in the next chapter. Lucius, Malfoy, and Narcissa Black come. They're concerned about Draco. There's a little bit of explanation about them. I do want to point out that Narcissa has her maiden name. She's not Narcissa Malfoy, she's Narcissa Black. This is because in Wicca culture, it's matriarchal, so it only makes sense that the women keep their surname rather than taking on their husband's surname. And then this scene ends with this confrontation with Rose, who wakes up and is all pissed. There's a moment in this where Snape is like, are you sure that she's Petunia's daughter? And, you know, maybe she's adopted. I would like this to be an ongoing joke in the story, that everyone's like, are you sure that you're not Lily Evans' secret daughter? Rose is not Lily's daughter. She really is Petunia's daughter. It's just kind of an ongoing joke. That's it for this chapter. That's it for chapter 9. I hope that it was, you know, a laugh, because that was the intention. But on more serious matters, the gun massacre at Uvalde was, you know, not a laughing matter. If you have the ability to donate, please do so.